I wasn't actually recording. Welcome everyone to the Ready or Not, the Fall Semester is Here webinar. My name is Lena Patterson and I am joining you from eCampusOntario, and I am thrilled to be joined by a collection of fantastic people. Nicole Johnson from the CDLRA, Mary Burgess from BCcampus, and Gavan Watson from Memorial University of Newfoundland. And we are here today to share some findings of a survey that was recently conducted, and also to engage with you in conversation about those findings and other things. So next slide, please, Nicole. So we want to start today by acknowledging the land. And this is an interesting thing to do when you're on a national stage because you're all in different places. And so while I go ahead and talk about where I am, I'm also going to post in the chat a link to a map of North America that lets you see what Indigenous territory you are currently on as well. And if you would like to share a land acknowledgement for where you are, you can go ahead and please do that in the chat. So I am currently on the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat. And the city of Toronto is actually home to 70,000 residents from Indigenous communities. It's the largest Indigenous population in Ontario and the 4th largest in Canada. Toronto is Treaty 13 territory, which encompasses everything from Etobicoke, Toronto, North York, York, and Vaughan. And this land acknowledgement reminds me of my privilege as a settler, and this practice reminds me that I'm accountable to those relationships, and that I have, as a first step, committed to learning more about the history of Treaty 13. If you are joining me in Toronto, I'm putting a link in the chat to a website from the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, and I invite you to join me in learning more about the history of Treaty 13 and the territory that we are on. Next slide, please, Nicole. So we welcome you here to this webinar. This is going to be a fascinating conversation, and I don't want to waste any time. I want to jump right into it, and I am going to pass the mic over to Nicole Johnson, Research Director for the CDLRA, to help walk us through some of the results of the survey. So over to you, Nicole.
Thanks, Lena. And I want to acknowledge as well, too, that I am presenting today from the traditional, ancestral, unceded shared territory of the Sumas First Nation and the Matsqui First Nation. And these two First Nations are part of the Stolo Nation. And the Stolo people have lived in the Fraser Valley, where I reside, for 10,000 years. And for that reason, I acknowledge the traditional territory in which I reside. So going forward, I want to give a background to the survey. And what you'll notice right away here in terms of the dates, the survey was open from August 10th through to September 22nd, 2020. And that is correct. We did close the survey a mere 2 days ago. So these are fresh, these are hot off the press, fresh results that we are excited to give to you today. One of the things that, because it's a fast turnaround in terms of giving the results to you, I want to let everyone listening know that we've got the national survey coming out. It'll be out in early 2021, the 2020 National Report for Canada, and also the Ontario Report. And in those two reports, we'll be going into even more depth in terms of the data we presented in both the Pulse survey, the first one that we presented in early summer, and also the data from this result. And we've also got other data that we'll be including. So a bit different than the CDLRA's previous national surveys, but 2020 has been a bit different of a year altogether. And we are excited to be investigating all the changes that have happened in the world of online learning in Canada over the past year. The invitations to the survey to participate were included in the Academica Top 10 and the Contact North newsletter. And we want to thank those two organizations for helping us to get the survey out to many participants. We also did an outreach through the CDLRA roster, and our response rate was 427 faculty and administrators from across Canada responded to the survey. And again, we just want to acknowledge the partners that worked with us to make this project a possibility. So a big thank you to eCampusOntario, to Bayview Analytics, to Academica Group, and to Contact North. And the research team for this project consisted of myself and Dr. Jeff Seaman, who is busy helping out in the chat today. So if you have any research-related questions as I'm presenting, Jeff will likely jump in and answer them for you as we're going. So the key findings from our data was that faculty feel prepared to teach online this fall. One of the things we found when we did our first pulse survey in the spring is the sense of overwhelm that faculty were feeling, a sense of really wanting to support students, not knowing how. There was a shift to emergency remote teaching, and for many faculty, it was the first time that they were in a situation where they were needing to teach online. So interestingly, as we go into this fall, faculty are feeling prepared. One of the reasons for this is likely that multiple options for professional development were made available to faculty over the summer, and faculty perceive these as being effective. And we also will be presenting data about the optimism, pessimism that faculty feel towards the future. And what we found too is the majority of faculty and administrators in Canada do feel optimistic about the future of higher ed. So with that, I'll get into some specifics here. So in terms of preparedness for teaching online, and we asked faculty specifically about teaching online, and that's important to differentiate because in the spring it was remote teaching that they were doing and what we refer to as emergency remote teaching. We wanted to know going into the fall semester whether faculty were feeling prepared to teach online with the understanding that online teaching is, isn't just emergency remote teaching, not just delivering things online, but actually providing a rich teaching experience. With that said, it's interesting to note that 87% of our faculty respondents agreed to some extent, either strongly agreed or somewhat agreed, that they felt prepared for teaching online in the fall semester, and only 8% of respondents disagreed to some extent. Over the summer, the spring, in the mess that was 2020, professional development options were made available to faculty. So we asked faculty what professional development options were either recommended to them or provided to them by their institutions. And as you can see, the most commonly recommended or provided professional development was live or recorded webinars. After that, about half of respondents also participated in faculty mentoring programs, self-paced training, online faculty community, and online resource hubs. For obvious reasons, in-person training was low. Now, we want to ask polls throughout this. So the first poll question that I'm going to ask you is related to professional development, and I want you to think of your own preferences. And what is your most preferred option, remote option for professional development? And I'm going to give you some choices below. So I'm just going to launch the poll here. And you should be seeing now a poll where you can choose one of the options for your preferences. And great, and we're starting to see responses coming in. And we like doing polls because it gives a sense, it's always interesting to see what we're seeing from respondents compared to what we're seeing from webinar participants. So we're seeing a lot of preference right away as results are coming in for live or recorded webinars and for self-paced training, as we see the results coming in. And I'm just going to give about 10 more seconds here, and then I'll close this, and I believe everyone will be able to see. All right, so I'm going to end this. So what we see here is similarly live or recorded webinars are most common, with remote self-paced training, second most common. So, oh, and Did I share? Now you can see the results. This is poll option. It gives me 4 different settings, and I always think I can share, then you can't. So, all right.
So Nicole, would you mind just speaking, verbalizing what the results of the poll are? Because there's some people in the chat who
sure.
have some issues seeing it.
Oh, for sure. Okay, so the question was, what is your most preferred remote option for professional development? So what we have as the top option that you just answered right now was live or recorded webinars. And 37% of you responded that that's your preference. We had the second most being remote self-paced training, which 32% of you, which is, again, we've got about 58 people on here. For the people who responded, there's 14 who said live or recorded webinars, 12 for remote and self-paced training. And then it was pretty well mixed, around 10% for the other 3, which would be faculty mentoring, online community for faculty, and an online resource hub. All right, so moving on, and I just have to shut this on my end. There we go. We also asked faculty, so if they had one of these professional development options available to them, we asked them about the effectiveness of that professional development option. So what we found is, regardless of the professional development option that was available to them, it was effective. So in other words, multiple professional development options were made available to faculty, and multiple professional development options were seen as very effective. So, you know, we see that 94% of respondents felt that an online faculty community was effective, 94% felt that an online resource hub was effective, 94% that a faculty mentoring program was effective, 89% live and recorded webinars. So really a strong response rate that the professional development was effective. One thing that we found in spring that we wanted to dig deeper on was the communication with students, because faculty indicated in the spring that communicating with students was one of their biggest challenges, and they wanted to keep students informed, they wanted to keep students engaged. So we asked them how they planned to continue communication with students in the fall. And interestingly, we see email as by far the most prominent way that faculty intend to communicate with students, with 94% of them intending to use email. One-on-one video conferences and the conference system within the LMS are the second most popular options, and then small group video conferences. One thing that we found very interesting, and this was both held true in both Canada and the US, was that very few faculty respondents indicated that they would be using social media to communicate with students. Only 6% of respondents in Canada, which is even less than phone calls. So faculty were more likely to pick up the phone and call students than to engage with them on social media. And finally, I want to launch our second poll question. And this has been interesting to track over the year in terms of optimism and pessimism that faculty and administrators are feeling towards the future of higher ed. So I'm going to ask you now, are you, and I'm just going to click to the second poll here, are you optimistic or pessimistic about the overall future of higher education over the next 2 years? We see a lot of responses coming in really quickly here. Thank you for that. And I'll give just about another 10 seconds or so, since almost everyone on the call has responded. Okay, I'm going to end the poll here, and I'm going to share the results. So what we can see here is, of everyone on this call, we've got 71%, 29 people who have expressed that they are feeling optimistic towards the future of higher ed, and 20% are pessimistic, and about 10% are neutral. So if I show you the results that we had from our survey, that's actually very comparable. So in terms of faculty, we see that faculty, the majority of faculty, are optimistic about the future of higher ed. And that is regardless of whether it's related to their personal role in higher education, the future for their institution, or the overall future of higher ed. In all cases, the majority were optimistic. If we look at administrators, we see even a greater extent of optimism, with it hovering around between 80 to 85% or 80 to 84, depending on with their personal role in higher education being most optimistic, and again, high levels of optimism towards the future of their institution and the overall future of higher ed. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Mary Burgess from BCcampus.
Thanks, Nicole. Really such fascinating results of the survey, and I'm really excited to be able to talk about that. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It's morning for me here. I'm coming to you today from the traditional unceded territories of the Lekwungen speaking people, now known as the Songhees and Esquimalt nations. And daily I'm grateful to be able to work, live, and play and continue to learn from Indigenous people here about their relationship to the land, which has existed since time immemorial, and to develop my own relationship with this land on which I'm an uninvited guest. So thanks so much for having me. We at BCcampus also did a survey of faculty. It's fascinating to me to see these results because ours was at the end of June. And I think attitudes have been shifting really quickly, and we see that in the results of these surveys. So what you're, actually, Nicole, can you go to the next slide, please? And thanks so much. We did a survey, like I said, at the end of June, and what you're seeing on this slide are the results of that survey. And I'm just going to describe first what's on the slide for accessibility purposes. Sorry, this one slide back. Awesome, thank you. So what you're seeing on this slide is that we had 209 respondents to our survey. 91% of those were faculty or instructors who are teaching in undergraduate programs. We have 25 public post-secondaries here in BC, and we had responses from 22 of those. 63% of the folks that we surveyed had not taught online before the pivot. 78% did make noticeable changes to the course because of the pivot, and 78% made their course more flexible for students to complete and access. So I just want to talk through those results a little bit to bring them to life a bit. So it had come as no surprise to us that 68% had never taught online. That's definitely what we had been seeing in institutions here in BC as we continued to try and get folks to build skills around online learning and teaching. And I think the biases against the efficacy of online learning continue to proliferate. But as much as that's been a really big bummer in the past, it's now the biggest opportunity those of us who are working and have been working in this field have ever had. And just to comment on a piece that David Porter put in the chat here, it does, I think, really show that when people have to make the change, they will make the change. And so I'm using that as an opportunity. So I just actually wanted to ask a question, and this has come up in the Q&A a little bit too, but how many of you here had taught online before the pandemic? And I'm just going to ask you to drop a yes or no into the chat about whether or not you taught online before the pandemic, just so that we can get a sense of who's in the room and what their experience is. Great, so lots of you have. Some no's. Yeah. And again, I think maybe there's some bias because the folks who come to this webinar might be people who already are involved in online, etc. But it's interesting to see that split. So there are two items at 78%, the making changes to the course and providing more flexibility. Those are both highly used strategies to meet the challenges of teaching in the pandemic. And here I want to highlight what we heard in the many webinars we hosted. We hosted about 70 plus webinars from March until the end of the summer to help instructors who were doing the pivot. And the main thing that we were seeing is that they really wanted to help students. The vast majority of the folks who showed up in our sessions were there because they really recognized the importance of their role in reducing stress on students, and they really wanted to do the very best that they could for students. And there was another reason why people showed up for our sessions, and that was that they were really looking for community. And again, it's interesting to see that that's what folks were. Some folks were looking for an online faculty community. People were coming together because they just wanted to be with other people who were experiencing the same situations. And so we hosted a number of sessions that were just community sessions, and people would cry and people would laugh, and we would have dance parties and just be together. And it was really wonderful because people wanted to be there for each other in really authentic and meaningful ways, and find ways of doing that with their students as well. So now, Nicole, if I can get you to bump to that next slide. Thank you so much. So I'm just going to again describe the slide for accessibility purposes. So this one is about us moving forward in the next 12 to 18 months. And that's what we were asking folks to kind of look into the future and see what they thought needed to be changed. And so on the slide, we have the question, what changes need to be made to your course, again, before they are offered online again? 37% said that the distribution of grades needed to change. 30% wanted to add online proctored exams. 18% wanted to remove exams, and I'm going to talk about exams a little bit, surprise, in a minute. 63% wanted to change the technology. 79% wanted to change the types of assignments that they had. 32% wanted to change the course learning outcomes or objectives. And 46% thought there would be more expectation for students to participate in online live sessions. So that's 79% that said that the types of assignments used would need to change before courses can run. The data that we collected in the qualitative area of the survey was really about how assignments are going to be facilitated. So for example, how do I do the things I've done face-to-face in the past now that we're online? 63% believe that the technology needs to change, and bear in mind that this was really early on in the pandemic, early-ish, where a lot of folks were using Zoom heavily, but not necessarily knowing how. So we saw a lot of responses that indicated that there needed to be certainty about what was supported at their institutions. And I think we're definitely moving more into that space now, so that may account for some of that optimism that folks are feeling. 46% feeling that there will be higher expectations of students to participate. That's definitely been showing up in a whole bunch of different ways. And 37% expect the changes in the distribution of grades. Again, much of that was related to using alternative assessment strategies, changing the weighting on previously heavily weighted assignments like exams to not be quite so heavily weighted. 32% seeing changes in the course learning outcomes or objectives, which I find really fascinating. And one of the things that I've seen through the pandemic is that when courses or when instructors were teaching to learning outcomes, it was much easier to do the pivot. So when you're teaching against content and your lectures and the assignments are about those things versus helping students achieve competencies or learning outcomes or objectives, it makes it much more difficult to redesign assignments for different delivery modes, and we definitely saw that play out. 30% seeing the addition of proctored exams, and 18% seeing that exams needed to be removed. Yes, please. 6% believing that no changes are required and that the course can run as it is. So I'm just going to talk about some of how the items that I just talked about are now playing out in BC institutions. And one of the things that came up right away was a really pressing need to find a way to do labs. Obviously, nobody was going to be into labs in the institutions. And so one of the choices that we've seen in some of our institutions is to separate coursework from labs. So in some programs, labs that were previously done face-to-face have now been put off to later parts of the program, and students are working on the courses that are more content-based at this point. What we did at BC Campus to help with that is that we had one of our staff, Ariana Sheveldave, go out and do some very quick research about what was available for labs. I'm just going to close my blinds here so I don't get blinded by. Sorry about the sun, everybody in BC, that we're having in Victoria. So Ariana found a massive list of items, and we then worked with some willing faculty who reviewed those items for us. And then we were able to publish an ebook that could be used for anybody who wanted to, about the labs that were in there and how to use them and what courses they would be applicable to. So we had a lot of uptake of that lab manual as well here and elsewhere. And that was really exciting, I think, for another reason, which is that now means that labs will be more accessible to a wider variety of students with different abilities, accessibility challenges, things like that, because we have options now. So I think that's really great. If you're looking for that, just go to the front page of the bccampus.ca website, search labs, and it will be the first result that comes up. So now I want to talk a little bit about exams, and some of you will know that I wrote an article about exams that threw a little bit of a flaming spear in their direction a couple of months ago. And my concerns about exams are not new, but the pandemic has really presented some new ones with the use of online proctoring software increasing very suddenly. And I'm not going to go into a whole bunch of details about why I worry about exams as an assessment strategy here. Again, if you want to read the article, I would love it if you did, and think about how you can change your practice as well. But the main thing about exams as an assessment strategy is that they're not accessible to all students. They're often not inclusive to all students, and they often don't adequately assess learning. So the fact that a large number of educators are looking for solutions to how to administer exams that are normally taken in face-to-face settings really spurred me into action, because again, I see that as an opportunity to make some change happen. And we've been working with educators in BC to develop alternative assessment strategies. We are actually seeing a few institutions in the province who've made the decision to take the approach of redesigning assignments and not implement proctoring software, which is really cool. And they're offering training for educators on how to do that. We also sponsored some research in order to help advance that work. So we have a faculty research fellows program at BC Campus. And so we have two of our faculty fellows are working in this area. Megan Costello at the University of BC, or the University of Northern British Columbia, is researching how we can effectively move away from traditional proctored midterm and final exams in first-year physics courses in a way that will improve student motivation and understanding of course materials. And then we have Elle Ting at Vancouver Community College, and she's looking at the modes of alternative assessment implemented at Vancouver Community College by instructors and how successful they feel those have been in supporting academic integrity. So we're excited about that work and what it might show in terms of exemplars for other educators who are worried about what's happening in that space and wanting to do something different. I want to just talk a little bit now to wrap up about willingness to work on curriculum together, and that's been one of the most exciting things for us. Again, it's launched some work at BC Campus that we're really excited about. We were approached pretty early on in the pandemic, actually, to lead the creation of some open courses in BC that would be used across our system as educators pivoted their curriculum. And we're looking at that as a long game now and wanting to really dig into that work and create some exemplars. But the great thing is how we so quickly were able, on such a short timeline, to get some very willing and generous educators to share their courses with us so that we could begin to have this, this sharing happening, that other educators would then be able to use those. And one of the cool things that we're doing to make it easier for folks to find and use those resources is that we are, for metadata, we're using transfer agreements between institutions. So if somebody logs in from one BC institution and plugs their course name in and it transfers to other institutions' courses, the content will come up for them to show them that what is available for courses that they transfer with as well. So we're super excited about that. Stay tuned. The site went to soft launch yesterday. And I just wanted to say, to wrap up, that over and over again, what we've seen is faculty who are afraid and uncomfortable, but willing and wanting to do well and wanting to have the learning that they need in order to do well. And our goal has really just been there to be there for them and for students, to show everybody how amazing online learning truly can be. And that's all from me. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mary. Hi, everybody. My name is Dr. Gavan Watson, as the slide says, and I want to start by saying that my pronouns are he and him, and I'm joining you today from the ancestral homelands of the Beothuk and the ancestral homelands of Mi'kmaq and the Beothuk, that is the island of Newfoundland. I also want to recognize the Inuit of Nutassiavut and Nunatuqavut and the Innu of Nitassinan and their ancestors as the original peoples of Labrador. When we talk about connections to land, I'm lucky enough, even as my bio says, I get to, my house backs on green space, a fen. And we had bake apples that were ripe to pick in the summer, but right now it's prime time for blueberries and into lingonberries, for those of you. That's a North American, or a rather pan-Arctic term for these berries. So it's great to be joining you from this place. And I also take time to get to know the land, the landscape, and the gifts that it provides all of us. I don't have any slides, so perhaps if you don't mind, maybe taking I can't look at myself, my picture for 10 minutes. And it would be nice to see everybody, or provide people with another view of our Zoom windows. Just to provide some context, Mary, I really appreciated that sector-wide perspective that you provided as far as BC Campus was concerned. I think those of you who are in provinces with multi-institutions or an organization like BC Campus, eCampusOntario, are incredibly fortunate to have an organization that helps take that, that provincial and sector-wide approach. I'm going to be talking a little bit about what Memorial University of Newfoundland did in not only reaction to the pivot online or remote, perhaps, acknowledging the, I'm pointing to my chat window over here, acknowledging the chat that we're having around we're problematizing this notion of the dichotomy between remote and online. And also talk a little bit about the work that a unit that I direct as the director for the Center of Innovation and Teaching and Learning has done to help support the work. Let me just share a little bit with what academics did. And I think what's really exciting to see for me was that academics became learners. Now, granted, faculty members are always learners, but I saw more engagement and more work, my colleagues engaging in more work on teaching and learning over the course of the late winter, early spring and summer to prepare for the fall than I had before. So, you know, I say and have said again that they are working hard and have worked hard to help make this shift. So they worked hard and became learners themselves. That means that they attended professional development, both on campus, things that we as a Center for Teaching and Learning facilitated. But I also want to acknowledge the fact that academics engaged with their colleagues outside of the institution. So sociologists met with sociologists who were teaching sociology. Biologists met with biologists who were teaching biology. And they worked across their disciplines to help engage and answer those questions. Also want to note that they worked with their own faculty peers within an institution. So we're incredibly lucky at Memorial to have a well-staffed teaching and learning center with competencies that span a bunch of different areas. But I also have to say that we don't have enough staff to support all of our individual faculty members and instructors one-on-one. And so I was pleased to see that we had academics who, within their own faculties or schools, identified leaders and worked to build communities of practice within those units. And those broadly, those three things were the way that I saw faculty members become learners themselves, investigate and prepare for the task ahead. When it came to actually preparations, we provided the guidance, and there was a lot of discussion about this around the shift of material from real time to asynchronous for the purposes of enhancing the accessibility of that material, and quite frankly, the likelihood that if you run into technical difficulties, students would be able to access it at a different time in a different way. Access, in its many different flavors, was a serious concern for us. And continues to be. The metro region of St. John's has reasonable high-speed internet, but we have students across the Atlantic bubble. So we have 70% of our students are studying across the Maritimes and Newfoundland and Labrador, the Atlantic region. And we know that in more rural areas, the internet infrastructure is not as strong. And so we wanted to ensure that students had continued access to material. We know that academics took us up on that recommendation, and faculty members took a lot of time to prepare materials so that they'd have that ready to go. To Mary's point as well, and echoing the survey findings, we saw that academics updated assessments to consider alternative modes and means of assessments and reduce the reliance on proctored and invigilated final exams. That's not to say that they disappeared completely at our institution, but I know that our staff engaged thoughtfully with academics to help them think that through. And then finally, they considered designing learning experiences that really addressed one of the challenges of online and remote learning, and that is, how do you facilitate the achievement of a competency or a learning outcome when you can't guarantee that students have access to the same materials? Now, granted, through a device, you may have access to a learning management system or access to a piece of software, but let's be frank, especially if we're talking about labs or other kind of experiential learning opportunities, we don't necessarily have access to the same kinds of things. So, you know, my example here is we have a faculty member in our Human Kinetics and Recreations faculty, Dr. Taya Loeffler, who normally would have taught an introductory skills, introductory outdoor skills course, and would have taught knife skills with sticks, so whittling. And in order to shift that to remote, she got students to do a similar thing using paring knives and carrots. So she was able to, again, to the point that Mary made, she knew what the learning outcome was. She knew that she wanted to achieve, but then shifted her approach. I just want to close in the couple of minutes that I have now and just talk a little bit about, I've got about 3 minutes left. I want to talk about what the teaching and learning unit here at Memorial did in order to help facilitate that shift. So just like the literature or our research our results show today, we shifted online and facilitated over 30 brand new professional development sessions for faculty members. Those were never facilitated before. Those were largely facilitated through synchronous webinar, but were recorded, and now we have a lovely repository of asynchronous webinars that faculty are able to avail themselves of. We also took advantage of the fact that we could refresh resources and created over 50 new online resources that are housed on our website to be able to support faculty members, so that we could take advantage of that asynchronous piece. Some broader things that I think that we did is that we engaged students in a survey over the summer months, asking them about their technological capacity and needs, and shared the results of that survey with our institution and our academic units to help inform course planning. That's how we're able to say where students are, or even what the expectation is around their internet access speed. If we hadn't done that kind of survey, we wouldn't be able to advocate for students and their own success. I also want to just close by talking a little bit about the important role that I think infrastructure plays, and that we undertook as we're a teaching and learning unit that has pre-pandemic times lucky to have access to media production teams. We have a studio, but we adapted that process. Obviously, during the height of the pandemic, when people weren't coming online, we were providing advice and provided them with guidance on how to develop video materials in the best way possible. But the prevalence of COVID has decreased here in the province. And one of the things that we did was that we repurposed one of our classrooms and turned it into a studio so that faculty members could come in and book that studio and record teaching materials. We repurposed our classroom. We have our own we've used open source software to create our lecture capture system. Well, we repurposed our lecture capture system as a way for allowing faculty members to upload and serve videos. So what we were able to do was take the infrastructure that we had in place, and we pivoted it in order to be able to support academics to meet their revised outcomes when it came to remote and online teaching. I will pause now to open, to shift and open to Q&A. I suspect there's lots of interesting conversations, and I look forward to having that. So thanks.
Thanks, Gavan. That was great. I mean, I put in, while you were still talking, Gavan, in order to prep everybody for their questions, I put in kind of a high level list of what we covered between you and Mary, but then you added about 5 more interesting things there in the time that I had put up that summary. So I'm sure, you know, there's an absolute wealth of things we could dig into here. There are currently no questions in the Q&A because I think everybody maybe is probably just processing. And we have 15 minutes. And so I thought, hey, I'm in this seat. Maybe I'll ask a question. So I wonder if you might entertain this, and it's picking up on a couple of threads that we've seen. In all of your conversations with faculty, or in your own experience as teachers, if that's part of your practice, what has become of concepts like rigor and perfectionism and you know, being polished and those kinds of things? Can you reflect on that a little bit, and maybe what the pandemic has taught us, or some of the pieces that have started to come through in the way that we approach our new virtual world, whether that be professionally or personally? Any reflections on that?
I don't want to monopolize the conversation, but I'll just say that rigor hasn't gone away, but it has to happen within the context. I think specifically today, it has to happen within the context of the learning experience. You know, I've been asked this question before, and I think probably the one thing that we know about academics, staff, and students in higher ed is in this particular context is the increased anxiety and stress that everybody is under. And I just think that that has recalibrated how rigor is evaluated. And there's an understanding that it has shifted, hasn't disappeared. I have colleagues who are engaged in alternative modes of assessment, in teaching and learning strategies that maintain that rigor. But it looks different than what it did before. The interesting question for me will be what the snapback will be like if and when we return back to face-to-face classrooms where more, I'll say traditional, not in a bad sense. Often tradition is seen as archaic. That's not what I mean. I just mean traditional practices are seen or adopted because of structural challenges that we have. Often rigor and a lot of things that I'm seeing around academic integrity is not driven because academics aren't interested in trying alternative assessment methods. They're actually driven because of larger structural challenges that they have, simply not being able to meaningfully provide feedback to hundreds of students that might be enrolled in a course. I'll pause there.
It's a great question, Lena. And I think one of the things that's become really clear to me is how much we have conflated things like rigor and integrity with being within the walls of a colonial institution. And what I would say is that there is definitely still rigor and definitely a lot of concern for rigor. But because we have had to remove ourselves from that setting, that really reinforces some of those notions that actually may not be supportive of learning, that we're kind of in a position to break that down now. And so I think, you know, thinking about people feeling more comfortable maybe in their home space or those kinds of things, I think can actually improve learning. And so I think I want to think about it differently. And I think making the assumption that rigor comes from being face-to-face in a lecture theater or something of that nature is actually something that we've maybe assumed was true, but I don't actually believe was the case always. And so I think we're uncovering some of those assumptions that we had about the value of that colonial institution, and it's enabling us to move ahead in different ways.
So following on from that, there's a great question. So the questions came in while we were talking. There's a great question that is kind of gets to the practical elements of what we were just talking about, which is, you know, what are the most interesting assessment types or exam alternatives that you have seen in the move to online? People are clearly looking for ideas, looking for ways to get inspired and creative in that respect. Anything you can share?
Do you want to talk about some of your folks, Gavan? I'm not as close, although I love the example of the paring knife and carrot. That's exactly the kind of stuff I'm seeing that I love.
So I have an example that I can't provide a lot of detail, but I will share, and it's not even a MUN faculty member. It was an example that I saw from an Australian academic who was an engineering faculty member. And what was interesting for me is that we've had conversations with the professional disciplines around the challenges of evidencing those learning outcomes. Often professional programs have outcomes-based accreditation, and the feeling as though that, again, more traditional assessment methods are the best ways of evaluating those. However, this particular faculty member used, because engineering is a discipline that when you actually go out into the field, you're working in a team and you're answering really complicated problems. I'm not an engineering faculty member, nor did I study engineering, so I'm just using my understanding of it. He used MS Teams and provided students with a problem within Teams and actually got them to collaborate within a small work group. They had a limited amount of time, but we're talking an hour, to collaborate, divvy out work, have students go off and find answers, work through problems, check their errors, and put those up. So it was a real-time assessment based in a real-world problem that was facilitated through the teaching and learning technology that particular institution was using. That's really high level, but that's an example of something that I've seen that's been pretty compelling.
Great. And I can jump in on a couple of these other ones here. I think in terms of avoiding particular methods, I don't know that I would, I mean, please, if you cannot use a proctored exam, please don't. it's just so inaccessible to so many students, and has so many problems associated with it. The question about online learning is a fascinating one. This has been my field for my entire career. I've been doing this for just over 2 decades. I think one of the primary reasons we've not seen this happen sooner is that leadership in institutions have not prioritized it. Online learning have been the poor second cousins at the institution the entire time. Many institutions, and we see this bear out in the research that Trisha's group has done over the last few years. We see responses like, no, our educators are not prepared to teach online. No, we do not have the staff to prepare them to teach online. No, we do not have a strategic plan for teaching online. And so this has forced us into a situation of having to look at that. But I think it hasn't been rewarded, it hasn't been incentivized, and it hasn't been valued at the institution in the same way that traditional teaching methods have been.
Gavan, do you want to say anything about that? Just for everybody's sake, the question is, online learning has been available for over 20 years. Why did we not see these changes happening sooner?
Yeah, as I look forward, and I certainly don't have a crystal ball, I am interested in thinking about the transition in the coming semesters when it's possible for instruction to return to the face-to-face classroom and what will be the lasting lessons. To Mary's point, I'm not sure the incentive structures, even promotion and tenure within a university setting, are in place to continue this systematic and foundational change to shift online. So I would, if I was going to be pessimistic, but against the findings that we've seen, I would actually see that we're going to see a shift back to privileging face-to-face. And maybe that's okay because we're talking about a cyclical, progress isn't linear. I think it's a more non-Western approach is to consider it cyclical. And so to understand that that's all right. That we can see these moves back and forth. I think that's what I would say about that.
Yeah, and I just want to jump in too, because I think that's really of what's of a high interest to us right now at CDLRA too, is tracking that and looking at, we've looked at online enrollments, we've tracked online and digital learning prior to the pandemic from 2017 through 2019. This year is unprecedented. It's, when we look at data going forward, it'll be the data pre-2020 and then the data post-2020 with this major event. And we're looking, that's of high interest to us to see what parts stay, what parts transform, what parts do fall off when face-to-face is possible, and how this is going to have a long-term impact on higher ed.
I'll just say that one of the things that's emerging now as the semester is unfurling, and I think it's interesting to hear, is that at least from, I think I'm certainly hearing it at my institution, but I'm hearing it wider as I look across North America, is people are starting to feel a little bit overwhelmed. Which goes back to the fact that feeling prepared to teach online and actually being prepared might be two different things. And that's going to be another interesting thing to consider as far as this research is concerned, because I think that absolutely there was a lot of work that was done to help prepare faculty and students for online learning come the fall. But the realities may be that the designs that were undertaken and even the strategies and approaches that are being used act as a barrier for future revision and adoption. So what I want to say specifically is I'm hearing from students that they're feeling overwhelmed at the number of discrete tasks that every single course is asking them to do. And faculty are feeling communication overload where they, I'm familiar with one faculty member who has 2,100 emails in their inbox related to a course that they're teaching, an introductory second-year course. And those kinds of experiences have nothing to do with the learning experience per se. It's the peripheral tertiary supports, but that they play a very important role in the adoption and the use of these kinds of techniques and the online learning environment as a way of facilitating learning. I just think it's going to be interesting to see how those play out in the future.
That's wonderful, Gavin. Thank you so much. And it's 12:59, and so in respect of people's time, we have to end it there. I would just note, Nicole, for your purposes, and you, Jeff, that there's a fantastic question in the Q&A, which is about, from Janet Vlodnik, which is about, can anyone comment on finding a realistic gauge by which to evaluate fall courses? She's talking about that gap between ERT and online, and the fact that most courses are somewhere in the middle. And so maybe that I will leave that question unanswered, but maybe put it as a challenge to the CDLRA team to figure out how to evaluate that, because that's what you do so well.
Yes, and I put my email, sorry for the fast flash through all the slides at the last minute. I put my email up too. So please, if you do have any questions or comments or anything that didn't get answered during this webinar, please reach out to me anytime. I will gladly respond. I can touch base with Gavin and Mary if needed, but we would love to hear from you. Insights, feedback, questions. We're always happy to hear from you.
And I'll just add one more thing, that if you did select to receive follow-up information about this webinar when you registered for this webinar, you will receive follow-up information regarding this webinar, including the slides and the recording. So thank you all so much, everyone who has joined us today. We really appreciate you coming together to have this excellent conversation with us. So I hope you all have a good end of your week, and take care, everybody.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye, thank you.
Thank you, everyone.